Hey, thanks for tuning into my podcast. This is Big Head on the Block, hosted by me, Tim Henderson, aka Big Head. Hey, welcome back to Big Head on the Block. Today we're going to talk about canines. Canine, their handler, the deployment, all the training involved, and everything else. Y'all have been asking me as listeners to do a podcast on canines. So today, as a subject matter expert, I have retired Baton Rouge City Police Captain Craig Tibbets. Welcome, Craig.
Hey, how are you doing, Tim?
Good. Before we get into your background, Craig, I'd like to tell our listeners this. Canines are like elite athletes, Major League Baseball, NFL. You know, they've advanced past the college curriculum. That's the training component of it. Once they're street ready, they are elite. They're elite in tracking. They're elite in apprehension and obedience. For instance, they're able to jump fences. They're able to crawl under buildings, make apprehensions. They're able to track and trail people, whether they're offenders or just people that are lost. So these dogs are exceptional athletes, and they're really amazing to see. And before I talk to Craig real quick, I want to tell you the first time I was able to see an apprehension, I was in training with Joe Kolar. I was in my FTO phase, and we ran into a stolen vehicle that was parked outside of a residence. Well, in lieu of us, just recovering the vehicle, we decided, let's see if we can get somebody to come to this vehicle. To make a long story short, somebody walked to the vehicle. They decided to take off running, and eventually they bailed out of the car within a few seconds because they realized that we had them cornered on both ends, and they thought it was to their advantage to run. I get out as a young officer back when I could run. I really wanted to chase this guy, but after I took a step, I realized, the canine had been deployed. Now, we were quite a distance from this guy when he bailed out of the car, so I couldn't hear what was said, but I did see the dog running. And what was funny is this guy, he was doing okay, but the dog was catching him pretty rapidly. He decided to jump in the back of a truck as the dog was fixing to engage him. Instead of him staying in the truck where maybe he had at least a competitive advantage, the dog would have jumped in the truck and got him anyway. He jumps out of the truck and he tries to run. Of course, the dog apprehends him. And, a few seconds later, the handler catches up. He's taken into custody and, charged with the stolen car. So that's my first experience with canine. So tell us how long you were a cop, and then tell us specifically how many years you were in the canine division.
I did 32 years for the Baton Rouge Police Department, and I did 21 of them in canine. Okay,
so safe to say you were basically just a young officer when you went into canine, because I know when you made rank as lieutenant and captain, you came out of canine. So you must have got in canine your first few years.
Yeah. I started in 1990. I did 3 years on the street, and then I applied and got into canine because it was a selection process. I was very proactive. And the dogs I loved working and seeing them work when I was working in uniform the 3 years, and I got in 1993.
For those not familiar with the selection process in Baton Rouge, you have to be a very proactive, dedicated officer to even be considered for the K-9 division. And to get selected within your first 3 years of employment shows that Craig, which I can say for sure because I've seen him in action, is a dedicated police officer, very proactive. He's willing to engage the bad guys. He's the guy out there that you want on the street. Like I always say, when you sleep and the bad guys are creeping, Craig was one of the guys out there, even before he had his dog, but for sure when he had his dog, that was out there trying to get them guys creeping. So it's a prestigious spot within the department to be selected in K-9. So I commend you for being selected so early in your career. I wasn't there until 96, so I didn't have any knowledge of you back then. But from what I saw after I started in 96, your selection was well worth it. So let's talk about initially, just go over briefly. Y'all used to take donated dogs, and then you started purchasing dogs. Tell us the difference in having a donated dog that you have to kind of sift through as opposed to purchasing one?
Yeah. Donated dogs were usually dogs that you had family members or someone, a dog was abandoned and it was usually shepherds or some family member or whatever. Dogs, they were too much for a family member, and the dogs either showed aggression or bit someone in the family, and they brought them to the pound. Or we got shepherds that were just given up. We would take them in and we would work with them.
So basically,
when we did donated dogs, it usually took 5 or 6 dogs before you could actually find one that would even come close to being able to do the job on the street. Right after I got in, they started the first process of buying dogs, which we would get from vendors, and they would ship them in. And these dogs had a little bit of already, when we would get them, they were called green dogs. But a green dog would have already some type of search in it to be able to go and look, to be independent, to search in a field or something for a toy or something. And then they also were introduced to apprehension work on an arm piece, just basically on an equipment type thing. So these were the type of dogs that we started getting, and then we took them from there and built them up to street dogs.
Okay, and for those people out there who don't really have a lot of experience with canines, everybody that has a German Shepherd and now Belgian Malinois, they think that their dogs are capable. Rin Tin Tin, Ruffy, whatever you name your dog. Everybody thinks that their dogs can be police dogs because they show certain traits. But I'll tell you this, I bred and trained dogs away from the police department for over 15 years. And there's very few dogs, even in my breeding program, there were probably 2 or 3 in a litter that could be dual purpose or single purpose police canines. And having a donated dog that you have to sift through, I could see would be very annoying. So BRPD made a good decision, probably cost effective decision to buy dogs. And when he's talking about green dogs, these dogs have a little exposure to all the elements that they need to be successful as a police dog. So he's not buying a dog that was raised in somebody's backyard. He's buying a dog that a vendor put some training into and exposure, because these dogs, and Craig can tell you more, these dogs have to be environmentally sound. They have to be at least social enough, to where the handler can to control them. But he doesn't necessarily have to be friendly to other people because he has a job to do. Some dogs are friendly, some dogs are not. I've seen both, in my career. So let's talk about you specifically. You were selected. You went to training. If I remember, it's 400 some hours of training that y'all have to go through, right?
Yeah, we do 400 hour of basic training where you do it. It's called USPCA. That is, our department chose that organization because at the time that organization was the most elite. And then our department went further and put in and added another 80 hours of tactical training where you actually, for 2 weeks, you were put through a very strenuous street realization type thing, training type to put the dog in to environment that you would be working in the street to make sure that the dog was able to be successful.
So you go into training, you train to a standard, which is the USPCA, United States Police Canine Association. Then specifically with Baton Rouge, because, our listeners aren't all from Baton Rouge, the Baton Rouge City Police Department has a 2-week standard. And once you're proficient and show a certain amount of proficiency, then you're allowed to work the streets. So let's go back just a little bit and kind of touch on this. When you first get your dog, obviously your dog is an adult, at least a year old for the most part, sometime 2. Tell us the bonding process that you have to go through. You don't have to get real in depth, but just, how you feed the dog, play with the dog and stuff like that.
Usually when you first got the dog, because usually it's especially if you're a new handler, they're going to put specific tests in dogs to see their ability, to see how well they worked independently and work, and whether when they had trouble, whether you as a handler could also step in to help it and to where you could mesh and work as a team. And it was more just testing the dog on environmental stuff to make sure that the dog was sound and the dog didn't have deficiencies that would cause problems later on in training or later on down the road. And then you come across a life or death situation, the dog wouldn't perform. And so the first week and a half or 2 weeks was just a bunch of tests that we'd go through the city, and you put the dog in different situations, playing with stuff just to see how they handled slick floors, climbing ladders, platforms, crawling under houses, just different things like that to see if the dog was
capable
in that.
So let's take out that component of it and just talk about you feeding the dog, watering the dog, petting the dog, bathing the dog. Was there any of that went on?
Yes, all of that. Yeah, we have a standard where you have a kennel, and they very specific on where the kennels, on how the kennel's supposed to be built and everything like that. So you did that, and you brought the dog home, and the first 2 weeks was a bonding time where you fed the dog to try to get that bond to where when you started your training, because it was very strenuous, that you were able to work together.
Okay, so you've completed your training. Obviously, you have completed the bonding already, because the bonding came and then the training came, yes, which intensified the bond. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, you decide, hey, or your division commander, whatever, decides, hey, Craig's proficient, the dog's proficient, they passed all the standards. Let's put him what we call 10-8, which is available out on the street. So you out on the street 10-8. For those who are not familiar with police canine divisions, let me say this about the training. A lot of departments buy dogs that are already trained, and they send a handler to a 3-week course to either expedite it or because they don't have the ability to train these dogs themselves. So I commend Baton Rouge City Police in their mannerism of getting these dogs ready. They do in-house training. They certify with an independent organization, and then they're certified, however you certify, within a 2-week tactical course, and then you put out on the street. So y'all have already shown a lot of dedication, because I'm going to be honest with you, 400 and something hours of training with a dog, that's a lot. You know, I know people like their dogs, and I too enjoy dogs, but you have to be a dedicated officer, right? Because you're a police officer, but now you have an added responsibility because you have to take care of this dog every day. You have to feed him, you have to water him, you have to play with him, you have to train him. Is that right?
Yes.
So now you're out on the street, day one, and I already know the answer because we've talked about it before. But I want you to tell me a little. Just give me some insight on your mindset. I'm sure, like, you had your chest poked out and you was excited. I passed all the tests. Now I get to ride the streets. Tell us about your excitement and about how the first few hours went, and what do you remember most about that first day?
Well, it's rare, but my first night on the street, I was actually able to utilize my dog, and I actually was able to catch a bad guy using the dog coming right out of training. So, the first night, yes.
Let's go back to right when you got in that car. And then we'll get to that. Right when you got in that car, you had to have some kind of emotional feeling, like, hey, man, I finally made it. This is a lifelong dream. You know, is that something that you were experiencing?
Yes. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's just kind of like anything. The day you graduate from high school, the day you graduate from college, the day you get your doctorate or your master's or something like that, anything in the world, in your life that you've come. The first time you're on a team or you're in sports and you win a championship,
right,
whether it be local or whatever. I mean, these are the type feelings you go through because of the rigorous stress and the dedication that you got to do to put in to these dogs, and you're able to get this dog to a level where you're able to go out there. And let's face it, when you become a police officer, most people become a police officer because you're wanting to help people.
Right.
You're wanting to make a difference. You're wanting to go out there. You're wanting to defend the innocent. Catch the bad guys. and make them pay for their crimes and things like that by arresting them and taking them off the streets. So the streets are safer, your family's safer, your friends are safer, and everyone's safe. So,
and
you've got all those emotions going through.
Yeah, and quality of life, because a lot of people don't understand that a police officer can impact the quality of life in areas that they patrol. So goal achieved. You're sitting in your car. At some point in time, you were asked to respond as a K-9 officer. Tell us about that first night, as unique as it is, that you got to deploy your dog. Tell us what the call was. I know it's been a while back. I'm sure the case has been adjudicated by now, so you don't have to name names, but just give us an overview. Was it nighttime, daytime? Was it raining? Was it cloudy? Was it hot? Just kind of give us an overview of the whole incident.
It was nighttime. It was about 1:00 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, and we got a call of a suspicious vehicle or a suspicious guy looking into vehicles in a neighborhood, possibly burglaries. And earlier that night, they had put out they had a car that was stolen. And I don't remember, but I want to say there was a possible gun involved. Well, I got into the area and I happened to catch this vehicle. As I get behind the vehicle, I let headquarters know. The vehicle immediately starts running because it sees me coming.
When you say running, tell our listeners, basically a pursuit is occurring at the time, right?
Correct. I mean, the vehicle sees me and immediately accelerates and starts to take off before I turn on lights or anything. And I actually had to turn around in the in the middle of the street to get behind it because it was going the opposite way of me. And I started chasing I started putting out a pursuit. I turned my lights on and everything. The vehicle then turned on to Mason, East Mason, which is just south of Airline Highway. And it was going around. And if you're familiar with that area, there's an S curve coming off a plank road. And as you come around that curb, I think he was going a little too fast and he went off into the ditch. So then he jumps out of the vehicle and starts running. And he runs into an area in between, East Mason, Scenic Highway, Airline, and Plank Road. So we started setting up a perimeter.
Tell our listeners what you mean by setting up a perimeter, because a lot of people that listen don't have experience with police terminology.
Okay. Perimeter is when the police are responding and you're trying to contain the suspect within a certain area. So you can utilize the tools or dogs or things like that. Now they have helicopters, so you can flares to where you maintain a guy in a certain area to where you can close into his location and actually catch him and apprehend him. And so you have officers spread throughout that whole area, which is probably it was a large area and had a couple of houses in the area, but the majority of it was a wooded area.
Okay, so the perimeter is utilized to contain someone in order to, like you said, utilize whatever resources you have available to try to make the apprehension. And it's important to keep, for those listeners out there, it's important for police to maintain their perimeter. Everybody wants to get into action, right? But you need at least 4 people to have a perimeter for the most part. You can do it with 2 if they can watch 2 different areas, but you need 4, 10, 12, however many, because the number one objective is to keep the person contained. So if I'm on a perimeter and I hear a noise, I should let another unit check that noise out if possible, because I've seen people leave perimeters and I've seen bad guys go right where they were at. So the objective is to maintain the perimeter, to keep the person contained, give your resources the ability to apprehend that guy. For those listeners who may not really kind of understand the gravity and nature of the importance of a perimeter, especially in a situation like this where you have a known felon and potentially a violent felon. So take us back to you getting out and doing whatever it is you do with your dog.
Once we got the perimeter set up, I then parked where I saw him take off and run. I put my dog on a tracking harness, which goes around their chest so they can pull and it doesn't restrain him in any way to choke him or anything like that. It's just a regular harness that people now use to walk their dogs sometimes. And we put him on a tracking lead, which is about 15 to 20 feet long. And I basically put the dog on the bad guy's scent and told him to track. And he started tracking through the woods. We tracked about 15 minutes and we tracked up into a big open field area that was grown over. So, I mean, you couldn't even, it was this high, probably 6 foot weeds all the way through. And we got to a area where they had a bunch of large trees or logs that had been piled up. So it was basically a big large wood pile that was up there. And the dog indicated and was trying to get into this wooded area. We held up the dog at the time, not knowing we took cover. And basically I gave a warning for the guy. I said, hey, come out. He didn't come out. Gave him another warning. He didn't come out. At that point in time, knowing that he's actively hiding from us, it's showing his intent to either possibly cause me harm. He could still be armed with a weapon. He could have armed himself with a weapon. A stick can be, a sharp stick. You can still be hurt with a stick, or he could have found a log or a brick or something he could have armed with, or he could have still had a gun on him. So at that point, his unwillingness to surrender, then I allowed the dog to go into the wood pile, and at which time the dog located him and they began to fight. The guy actively fought the dog for several minutes, and it took 3 of us to actually apprehend him.
So your dog's
the assistance of the dog.
Your dog's engaged with the bad guy. He's fighting, refusing to surrender. You and the other officers that were with you for backup or assistance, y'all were able to control the dog and then apprehend the guy yourself. But it wasn't without a long fight, is what you're saying. He basically was taken. He was on some type of narcotics, so he was high on something. And when we had to fight him, he acted like the dog wasn't even phasing him at all. And the dog had bit him, if I'm not mistaken, it bit him on the leg and the arm. Okay, and for those listeners out there that think, hey, man, I would give up, guess what? I've seen a lot of apprehensions in person, and these canine officers will tell the guys, quit fighting my dog. The average person like me and you, whoever's listening, we think, oh, man, that had to hurt. Sometimes they're amped up and they don't feel it. They probably feel it the next day or the day after. But believe it or not, a lot of these people will continue to fight these dogs, man. And these dogs have very powerful jaws and they're committed. If you become violent, they're going to continue to fight because they've made it through the selection process and they're capable. But it's really, funny for listeners to hear, Craig, because they think, oh, I would give up. These guys, they don't give up. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of times they don't give up. So, maybe you can kind of tell our listeners most of the apprehensions that you have where they fight your dog. Do you think that they're on drugs or they just amped up and just don't want to go to jail?
It's a lot of it. They're probably on drugs. And then some of it just kind of depends. It could just be a bad guy that they could care less about life. They could care less about anything, and they're just wanting to get away. And the intent to get away, the desire to escape or get away or not go, not want to go back to jail or something like that. You never know what motivates these people. And some of these guys, it's just like anyone. Everybody has a different tolerance of pain or different tolerance of just whatever. And so these are bad guys that want to get away, and they will do whatever it takes, and they don't care, about that.
And look, we've had them fight us as humans, not even those of us that hadn't had dogs. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 of us to subdue these people because some of them are really committed for whatever reason, like Craig said, either through drugs or through motivated not wanting to go back to jail for 25 or 30 years or whatever the case may be. So you just never know what's in a bad guy or offender's mindset. But man, that was that was a very intriguing first night, man. That was something that you trained for, and you were called upon immediately to show that your training was effective. And obviously you made the apprehension and made the arrest. So kudos to you, man. And it's almost downhill from there, man. How can you beat a first night like that on the job?
It was fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's fun now that you think about it, but that's what we train for.
Yeah.
And when you're there and you're successful, it's very gratifying.
And these, for our listeners out there, these are intense situations, right? These are life and death situations. There's a component of an unknown variable with everything that police do. And I've told y'all that in other podcasts. Everything that Craig experienced and his dog experienced was an unknown variable. Unknown, everything up until even after the apprehension, right? He still don't know why the guy's fighting. Eventually, I'm sure the guy probably told him, or they figured out that, he was just too amped up to make good decisions. But police are always put in constant danger in these situations. And K9, the actual K9 itself, has to work independent, like Craig told you earlier. And that dog is at risk also. A lot of people don't really factor that in. So tell us a little bit about the dog's ability to work alone, and then the risk that he's sometimes asked to absorb, to get the job done.
We get them when they're like in college, and you're relying on all their attributes, and you're looking at what they're showing when you're just testing them and things like that. It's kind of like college. They're being prepped, they're learning, and then you have to go in, and then when you make the NFL or you make the Major League Baseball, now you have to put what you learned all that into there, and you have to be proactive. You have to be successful. You have to perform. And so that's what these dogs are basically like. And it's just like anything, how many professional football players do they have from college?
Right.
Obviously, it's a very,
small
percentage.
Right.
And so basically police dogs are basically the same way. I mean, you're filtering through hundreds and hundreds of dogs to get maybe a handful, of dogs that are capable of doing it. And so there's a process through it. So when you get these dogs are, they need to be treated as professional athlete type stuff.
And what he's talking about is the vendors now, and probably have for the last 20 or so years, vendors, they sift through these dogs where the departments don't have to. And there's usually guarantees with a dog. So if this one don't work out, you'll go to another one. But K9 dogs have the official title as officer, and they put their lives in danger to protect you. And they're trained. If we didn't talk about it earlier, I want to talk about it real quick. They're trained in obedience, agility, protection type work, which would be apprehension, and then tracking. So you have to combine all four of these to be a successful street dog. They have to be able to perform in an elite capacity in all four of these venues. And you as a canine officer, correct me if I'm wrong, have to be able to read your dog and interpret his behavior and be able to control him in any situation.
Yeah, you have to be able to help and re-guide them and direct them to make sure that they're on the right path and they're doing what's supposed to be done to do the job. And ultimately, you're responsible.
So your first night, we got it. You was in K9, you said 21 years?
Yes.
All right, so I'm not going to get you to tell me 21 years worth of stories, but while I'm asking the question, go back in your mind and tell me two different things. Tell me the best feel-good story that you found somebody or whatever, and then tell me about the bad guy that was the worst bad guy that you had to apprehend. And listeners, a canine will get credit for an apprehension whether the dog bites or whether he doesn't bite, correct, Craig?
Yeah, so how you work with that is through your career with your dog, you have to show proficient, and you also have to be able to show restraint and things like that, just like anybody for court purposes and legal issues. Yeah. We utilize what we have total apprehensions, and then the total apprehensions breaks into apprehensions with bites and apprehensions without. And how those come into play is if the dog was an intricate part into the surrender of that person where you were able to make the arrest, then you're utilizing a dog. So the majority of our stuff, probably these apprehensions where dogs are biting suspects where they actually apprehend, it's usually around 20% of total contact and total apprehensions that we get throughout the year or throughout the years. They stay at around 20 to 25%. So technically, usually 1 out of every 4 to 5 people that surrender, that we arrest utilizing the dog, only 1 out of 4 or 5 are actually apprehended. And those are the ones that just refuse to give up, because every person that we come across with the dog has the opportunity to give up.
Yeah.
Everyone, they're asked to give up. They're told the consequences, and you have 1 out of 4 or 5 that just refuses and will do whatever it takes to try to, that they think that they can get away.
Yeah, and I've been on a lot of canine deployments, and look, people, they give you warnings, all right? I'm as tough as anybody, I believe, and Craig's a tough guy too, but I can tell you what, if I'm sitting in a warehouse and I just committed a burglary and I broke the window and they got me cornered and I know the dog's coming, I'm giving up, because I've been bit by a dog before inadvertently, and I can't even imagine what it would feel like if it was on purpose, because I got bit in the tricep area and I thought they ripped my tricep out. It wasn't a police canine. It was one of my own dogs, and it was my fault. It wasn't her fault. She bit because I had something in my hand and I lifted it up and she jumped up to grab it. And like I said, that was on accident. So I promise you, bad guys, if you're listening, you probably don't want that dog to take a hunk out of you. Let's go back to the feel-good story, and let's go back to the one apprehension that comes to mind that you think was that our listeners would like to hear about.
I would say the most feel good one that I ever had, that I would say that was the most gratifying for me and one that sticks out in my head in my career, happened to be that one night they had a child, and he was 6 or 7 years old, Down syndrome child. It was Christmas time. It was cold. It was like 35, 40 degrees outside. And the parents, I guess somehow or another, the child was able to unlock the house and wandered off. These parents called the police, all panicking. He was a severe, I guess you could call it baby case or something like that. I don't know how all that goes. But he had wandered off, and they had been looking for the child for about 2 hours. They had narrowed it down to the child had been gone for about 2 hours. They called the police. The officers responded, and I happened to be listening on the radio. And I went over there, and I was talking to them, and they were like, hey, how do we do this? I said, well, look, I can track this kid. And they were like, huh? We can do it, because these dogs are not just going to track and just bite. They're going to bite on command. There's certain circumstances and we can do it. So we sat there, but just to be cautious, we told the parents, said, hey, look, this is a potential. If something happens, for instance, maybe the kid's hiding somewhere and because he's scared, and we get close and he jumps out startling and he startles the dog or whatever, there could be a potential where the dog could actually do that.
That's understandable, because, the dogs are going to protect themselves, and they don't know who this kid is compared to anybody else.
Right. Certain circumstances, the kid comes out, hey, and when you have Down syndrome, the kid could say, puppy dog, and just run towards the dog. And these dogs are not, just laid down. You know what I'm saying? They've been in the street stuff. So there's a minute possibility. So anyway, we tell them, and they're like, we need our child found, which they made the very smart, decision. So we started tracking, and I tracked this child, or I actually, because we didn't have a starting point, we just searched the area, and we did an area search for this child. And it was about an hour that we had, and it was probably about a mile and a half. And we found the child on a back patio. He had gotten into someone, not into the house, but he had gotten on their back patio, and they were not home. And he went up in under a covered patio. He had put someone's shoes on, the people that lived there. He had gotten a pair of shoes and a T-shirt, because all he was in his boxer shorts. So he had left the house and wandered and it took us about an hour and a half, and we found this kid. And when we found him, the dog found him, and I pulled up. I had the little toy for the dog. I introduced him, and I was able to let the child play with the dog. He did kind of what I expected. Doggy, he was excited, and my dog was sociable enough where my dog found him. And so those are one of those feel-good ones that, it was very, very cold, and this kid could have easily died, in the weather or something like that, or got hit or something like that. So those are one of the things that has happened. So, I mean, like I said, we do things. It's not just we go out and catch bad guys. These dogs are remarkable animals, and they can do multiple things.
Yeah, that's a good description of the dogs. They are remarkable animals because they're asked to do everything, and most people don't hear about these feel-good stories, and that's why I wanted you to convey one to my listeners to know, hey, man, these dogs find people. They do a lot of good. They do find bad guys because that's one of their objectives, right? But this kid, more than likely, and I'm only speculating because I don't know the weather conditions and all that, other than it was cold. But just think about a kid being out there an hour and a half. Think about you being out there an hour and a half in your boxers, and it being around Christmas time. It's probably cold, I mean, sometimes it's not in Louisiana, but the kid is exposed to all the elements and all the environments. He's exposed to other people, to walking in the street, like you said. So, man, that's commendable. And I hope that the department recognized y'all through some type of award on that one.
That wasn't one that I've been recognized for. And the reason being is because, in my opinion, that was my job.
Yeah.
And I was satisfied enough just with the way the parents were and the fact that we got the kid. I mean, we do things, the police do those type of things, are doing those type of things almost regular every day. And so, unless a supervisor or a citizen reaches out and expresses one of these outstanding type things, these are things that officers do every day.
Yeah.
I mean, similar type things. So that, to me, I appreciate the fact that you would think like that. But to me, that was just a regular day at work.
Right.
And the gratification and satisfaction for me was the fact that we found him, and my dog did what he was supposed to do, what he was trained to do, and he did it awesome.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. And what Craig is saying is true, because the day-to-day activity of a police officer goes unrecognized, but we do consider it our job. In this instance, you didn't go above and beyond. You just did your job. But the outcome was something that if I were your supervisor, I would say, hey, good job. You didn't need the gratification through the paperwork or through the meritorious award. You got it because you did your job, and there's a safe kid. I got that component. I got that aspect of it. But supervisors out there, when your guys do things that are a little more meaningful, and look, lost kids are found all the time, lost adults. There's a lot of things that go unnoticed because, yes, it's our job to do these things. But I was a cop 32 years, man, and I'm happy with the outcome of that story. If I was your supervisor, I would have given you a letter of commendation for a job well done. You did your job, and it was a job well done. So now, before we leave, tell us about that one bad guy that was problematic or that just needed to be apprehended, if you have a story.
In my career, I was involved in 3 shootings, 3 armed confrontations. And I would say the one that I was most impressed with of the performance of my dog, where I think probably my dog saved my life, was a time we chased a guy that was committing burglaries off Industrialplex. where they used to have the park a bunch of vehicles for offshore rigs where they would fly them, and that was like a parking lot for all the employees there. They had a guy that was breaking in over there. State police responded. The guy ended up hot-wiring a car that was in the parking lot, busted through the gate, and a car chase was on. It was a multiple
agency?
Yeah, multiple departments were involved. It was state, sheriff's department, Baton Rouge, and I'm not sure if there was maybe a Livingston or West Baton Rouge, because the pursuit was started in it. By the time we got in it, it had been going on for probably 45 minutes with shots being fired. A state trooper was shot, I think, in the leg. The car finally wrecked out over in the parking lot of Tiger Stadium.
Oh, wow.
And gunfire was exchanged. The guy ran through the LSU complexes around over there, had multiple rounds fired from other officers as they were coming in perimeter. Finally, the guy hunkered down, and they called us in. And so at the time, I had Dante at the time, which was my second police dog. And he was seasoned. He was experienced dog. And so in that situation, that's one of those where this is a life or death situation, because once we come across this guy, there's the likelihood of somebody being shot and killed is extremely high, because he's already had several shootings with other officers.
He's already proven that he's already proven that he's intent on doing what he has to do to get away.
Right. And one of the things that we found out, he had 2 duffel bags. He had already dropped one of the duffel bags during the pursuit, and in the duffel bag they found like 6 firearms in the duffel bag. And his other duffel bag, he was getting in shootings and shooting at police while he was chasing over the 45 minutes. And when he would run out of bullets on that gun, he would throw it out the window and pick up another one. And come to find out that he was stealing pistols out of all these cars at this complex. And so he had, I want to say somewhere around 15 pistols in total in 2 duffel bags that he had.
Wow.
And we ended up getting it once we apprehended him. And we got to a thing where he was confined in an area. He was hidden behind a wooden fence area, and he was basically waiting in ambush. And when we tried, the gate was locked. As I kicked the gate in to go through the gate to try to send the dog in, he stepped out to shoot at me. My dog immediately responded and took him down. He fired a round, but it didn't hit me because the dog had made contact with him. He fell over an air conditioner unit and ended up having his finger on a trigger and gave himself a self-inflicted wound. His finger was on the trigger, and the dog basically knocked him over and rolled him over. And so I look at it as that's one of the most dangerous things where I felt my life was very close, and the dog saved me.
The dog,
in my opinion, I can honestly say that the dog saved my life.
Yep, the dog put itself in harm's way to protect his handler, which is what his job is. I had forgot about that whole story, man. I'm glad you told it, because I literally had forgot about that. And once you started getting into it, I remembered it, because we're exposed to so many thousands and thousands and thousands of stories that it's hard to remember. And I literally forgot about that one. But that was good. And once again, he showed his desire to get away and to shoot at cops. But just like a lot of them, he turned coward in the end whenever he realized that he was going to have to engage. Once your dog engaged him, he realized that, the gig was up and that it wasn't going to end good for him. So, like a lot of them in those situations, they do the cowardly thing. But look, I want to tell you that it's really been good talking to you and hearing about your canine experiences and stuff. And maybe in the future, we'll do another podcast and just, touch on a few stories. We won't go back through all the training and everything, because people really like canines and they like to hear the stories and all. But thank you, retired Baton Rouge City Police Captain Craig Tibbets for being on Big Head on the Block. We look forward to having you again in the future.
Absolutely, Tim.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Big Head on the Block. I'm Tim Henderson, the host. I look forward to dropping another podcast soon. Please give us any comments, likes, dislikes, or any topics y'all would like to discuss. Thank you.